All technological merchandise we use today inaugurated as an idea in someone's perception. It then went from an idea to a blueprint, and then to a prototype, and then eventually to a product that we were able to go out and buy. Not every good approach makes it all the way along that chain. Some of them fail at the blueprint stage, and others make it as far as an effective prototype, but they don't quite get over the line as fully recognized concepts. This video is packed full of great technological near mishaps of the past.
Before we move further, make sure you hit that like button, and also subscribe to our channel, and turn on notifications so you can be up to date with our interesting content.
Back in the 1960s, military minds were still experimenting with the potential of helicopters, and what they could be capable of. One of the most experimental ideas of all came from the Soviet Union, where a company called Yakovlev imagined up an idea they refer to as the VVP-6. Well, it may have resembled an enormous helicopter. The flying engine was really a flying surface-to-air missile program with rotors, and would have competent vertical takeoff and landing. We say would have because we never had the opportunity to find out a scale model of the VVP-6 was built, but never a full-sized working device or even a private prototype. The mechanical specifications of the craft were considered to be too intricate and too difficult to build. And so the military passed on the opportunity to pay for further installation and testing. It might have been more suited to science fiction than science fact, but it's still an idea that was reasonably years ahead of its time. Here in the 21st century, we have a very distinct idea of what a tank looks similar, how it moves, and what it's composed. Back in the 1920s, no such regulated idea survived. Almost every advanced military force in the world was busily trying to come up with a reliable big armored vehicle for use on the battlefield. But their purposes were very different from each other. Arguably the first country to come close, designing what we'd recognize as a tank by modern standards, was Sweden, who came up with the Landverk L-5 in 1929. Despite its apparent promise and the fact that it visibly fulfilled almost all of the criteria that would have been expected of a tank of that era, the machine was never tested on the battlefield. The one unit that was built as a prototype, and according to the documents that still exist from that era, it was never supposed to be complete. Interestingly, although it was Swedish by design, all of the work on the Landverk was compensated for by Germany. At the time the extension of tanks was banned in Germany, so their military had to rely on trusted nations for support with military development. The existence and exploits of an eccentric aviation enthusiast and filmmaker Howard Hughes are well documented in publications, television shows, and even a movie regarding his life. He was concerned in the design of many experimental aircraft, while the middle of the 20th century, including the Hughes XH-17, the first helicopter his Hughes Aircraft Company ever endeavored to build. The two-bladed rotor system with its 134-foot diameter still holds the world record for the largest operation rotor system ever built. Moreover, a lot of ways the vehicle was a success. It could fly and it was honestly safe, but its entire weight of 50,000 pounds made it cumbersome and disorganized from a power point of view. Accordingly, it was decided that the primitive chopper shouldn't be considered for mass reproduction. Having made its first flight in late 1952, it had been consigned to use a scrap bundle of failed ideas by the end of 1955. Entirely one unit of the aircraft was ever built. Throughout the 20th century, both the Americans and the Soviet Union were continually struggling for new military ideas that would give them supremacy over their most generous rivals. That led to the design and partial construction of several experimental military devices, including a floating submarine by the Russians. And as absurd as the idea sounds, it was very almost a success. The first impression of a Russian flying submarine came from the 1930s, when engineer Boris Butakov Chicago drew up the first conceivably viable blueprint for such a device. It developed to be essentially sound, but expensive, and difficult to develop. So the approach was taken no further. A vehicle drawn from the waters off the coast of California in 1963 was declared by the Americans to be of Soviet design, and developed to at least nominally match Chicago's design. The White House went as far as alleging that the Russians were building innovative planes and submarines on the Copeland Islands. Possibly they were just suspicious. The Russian design, the Americans attempted to come up with a flying submarine of their own between 1945 and 1964. With little success before they eventually came up with the Lockheed Martin Cormorant in 2006. Is this Boeing production a plane or a helicopter? The famous aircraft design company first announced its ambitious design in 2010, when it was uncovered under the name of the DARPA Disc Rotor helicopter. With this particular design, Boeing hopes to consolidate the landing control and hovering experience that comes with helicopters, with the high height and speed aptitudes of a plane. As is often the case with new inventions like these, it was hoped that the military would be involved in ordering several units of the new vehicle. Boeing had been working on the design since 2008, that they would produce wind tunnel testing in 2011, with a view to in a fully operating prototype out for its first flight in 2014, but we're here in 2020, and there's been no indication of it. Boeing has never officially proclaimed that the project has been abandoned. But they didn't say anything further about it since 2011. We're left to terminate that at some point during the design method, possibly even during the earlier mentioned wind tunnel testing, a layout flaw was recognized and couldn't be overcome. Everything touching the space was a big competition, was big, huge rockets, huge launch pads, huge costs, and it nearly had large helicopters to have. The Hiller Aircraft Company of California, USA possessed their way. All the footage we have of Saturn V projectiles would look very distinctive. As insane as it sounds to hear this outbrash now, back in 1965, the company demanded to have designed a colossal helicopter that could hardly carry the first grade of a Saturn V rocket, but also overtake one in midair while it was falling. The broadness of the rotor alone would be more extensive than a US football field. Stan Hiller, who owned the company and came up with the idea, referred to his creation as a rotary wing system for promoter recovery, and wrote to NASA asking for funding so they could establish an operational prototype. It probably says a lot that NASA give out capital like candy to impressive projects back in the 1960s. But it determined not to fund this one. The only trace of the idea left is a small-scale operation model that hangs from the ceiling in the company's museum. You can do virtually everything with this prototype Lexus car, other than pushing at home in the rain or getting the wheels wet, first showcased in 2015. This is the world's first ever and probably only ever origami car made almost completely out of cardboard. The doors, interior wheels, and despite headlights are made from cautiously carved and shaped cardboard. And so the exclusive non-cardboard elements are the lightweight aluminum architecture and electric motor. This isn't so much a discarded concept as a car that was built to prove a position. The point is that it is reasonable to make vehicles enhanced environmentally beneficial, if architects are willing to think outside the box. It took a team of 5 people 3 months to achieve the design and build work on the Lexus, which can be inspired just like any other car. The seats look a little uncomfortable to us, but we can't help but be impressed by the level of skill that must have gone into putting all of this together. Toward the sea and aircraft carrier looks like a gigantic ship, but something does it look like in the air? It might look like a gigantic balloon, similar to the ill-fated USS Macon ZRS-5. It's hard to call this a failed prototype because it persisted in service for almost 2 years after it was originated in March 1933. However, after a destructive crash in 1935, it was abandoned and no replacement was formulated. It had been concluded that the use of airships like this was just too terrible. The USS Macon could transport 5 single-seater Sparrowhawk planes at the same time, or 2-seater fleet into one biplane instead, if needed. Many service minds were questionable of it from the moment it first flew. And when it came down in a blast off the Big Sur coast of California, it was the pretense that they've been waiting for to command that the Macon be forgotten about, and no other ships or replacement aircraft should be developed. Its more unexpected sister ship, The USS Macon had also been affected, in a fatal accident by the time the production went down, which further emphasized the unreliability of the design. A speedy, positive vertical takeoff and landing aircraft was a long-standing desire for both sides of the Second World War battle, and each major nation included in the war was working on an intention. Some of them got resembling coming up with a working model than others. And it would seem that the Nazis weren't far away from victory at all in 1944. This is Focke-Wulf Triebflügel, the name of which foundation plates as thrust-wing hunter. The Germans hoped that it could be practiced to intercept Allied planes, which by that stage of the war were sticking further and further into the German mainland on bombing missions. A full-sized prototype had been constituted by the Germans, and was in the process of going through wind tunnel testing when Allied forces seized the generation equipment that housed the unit. With the Germans driven back, the Allies clinched the prototype, and the project came to an unexpected end. Probably, anything useful that could be gathered from the design was then assigned, between Allied intelligence agencies and used to promote their designs. Back in 2012, French Naval Technology Group in DCNS was very excited about its theory for a brand new type of submarine, associated with SMX-26. The futuristic-looking and strangely shaped marine craft was supposedly operating to be proficient in defending the places that other submarines couldn't go, littoral zones and depthless waters. The SMX-26 would thrive in areas where water was shorter than 50 feet deep, and could also remain submerged for up to a month with no inimical effects to the ship or the team that lived aboard. Her and extendable wheeled undercarriage would allow it to ground quickly and securely in any type of seabed, and hoses could be immediately stationed to the surface to access air in an emergency. It sounds like an incredible piece of machinery, and every navy wants this in the world. They might be arranging a long time though, after getting everyone amazed by their 2012 announcement. They're still yet to produce anything that looks like a prototype. Subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications, and you will be the first to know when a new video comes out.